For more than 2,000 years, military historians have asked the same question. How could the most powerful army on Earth walk confidently into battle, only to be completely destroyed within a single day? It wasn't because Rome lacked courage. It wasn't because its soldiers refused to fight. They marched into the battlefield believing victory was inevitable. By sunset, the fields of Cannae had become a sea of blood, with tens of thousands of Roman soldiers lying dead beneath the scorching Italian sun. Their defeat was so devastating that even today, the Battle of Cannae is studied in military academies around the world as one of the greatest tactical masterpieces ever executed. At the center of this incredible story stood a single man, a commander whose name terrified Rome more than any king or emperor ever could. His name was Hannibal Barca. The conflict that led to Cannae had begun years earlier during the Second Punic War, a brutal struggle between two superpowers of the ancient world. On one side stood the Roman Republic, a rapidly expanding empire that controlled much of Italy and possessed enormous wealth, manpower, and political influence. Rome believed that no enemy could challenge its growing dominance. Across the Mediterranean stood Carthage, a rich and powerful trading empire located in North Africa. Carthage had already suffered humiliation after losing the First Punic War, surrendering territory, paying massive reparations, and watching Rome become stronger with every passing year. Many Carthaginians accepted defeat, but one family refused to forget the insult. The Barca family believed Rome had stolen their future, and they swore that one day revenge would come. According to ancient historians, Hannibal's hatred for Rome began when he was only a child. Before leaving for Spain with his father, Hannibal Barca, the young boy was brought before an altar where he placed his hand upon a sacred offering and swore an oath that he would never be a friend of Rome for as long as he lived. Whether every detail of that story is true remains uncertain, but one fact is beyond debate. Hannibal dedicated his entire life to breaking Roman power. As he grew older, Hannibal proved to be far more than a fearless warrior. He possessed extraordinary intelligence, remarkable leadership, and an ability to understand battlefields unlike almost anyone in history. His soldiers admired him because he marched beside them, shared their hardships, and accepted the same dangers. Whether crossing rivers, climbing mountains, or fighting in freezing weather, Hannibal never demanded sacrifices he was unwilling to make himself. That loyalty would become one of his greatest weapons. Instead of waiting for Rome to invade Africa, Hannibal made a decision that shocked the ancient world. He would invade Italy itself. It was a plan so bold that many considered it impossible. Between Spain and Italy stood towering mountain ranges, hostile tribes, and some of the harshest terrain in Europe. No commander had ever attempted to move a massive army through such conditions. Yet Hannibal believed surprise was worth every risk. In 218 BC, he gathered tens of thousands of infantry, thousands of cavalry, and one of the most unusual weapons ever seen on a battlefield: war elephants. As the army marched north, they crossed powerful rivers, fought local tribes, and eventually reached the towering Alps. Snowstorms buried the narrow mountain paths. Horses slipped into deep ravines. Supply wagons disappeared into frozen valleys. Many soldiers died from hunger, cold, and exhaustion before ever seeing a Roman soldier. Even several elephants perished during the crossing. Modern historians still debate the exact route Hannibal used, but everyone agrees on one thing. Crossing the Alps with an army was one of the greatest logistical achievements in military history. When Hannibal finally descended into northern Italy, Rome was stunned. The impossible had become reality. Instead of fighting on distant battlefields, Roman citizens suddenly found one of history's greatest generals marching through their homeland. Panic spread across the Republic. Roman leaders believed the invaders would soon be crushed, but Hannibal proved them wrong almost immediately. At the Battle of the Trebia River, Hannibal lured Roman forces into freezing water before launching a carefully prepared ambush. Thousands of exhausted Roman soldiers were slaughtered. Months later, he repeated his brilliance at Lake Trasimene, where Roman troops marched directly into one of the largest ambushes ever recorded. Thick morning fog concealed Hannibal's soldiers until the Romans were completely trapped. By the time they realized what had happened, escape was impossible. Entire legions disappeared beneath swords, spears, and the waters of the lake. Rome had suffered defeats before, but nothing like this. Fear spread throughout Italy. Villages questioned whether Rome could still protect them. Some allies secretly wondered if supporting Hannibal would be wiser than remaining loyal to the Republic. Yet despite these disasters, Rome refused to surrender. Instead, the Senate began raising larger armies than ever before. They believed that overwhelming numbers would finally destroy the Carthaginian invader. Meanwhile, Hannibal understood something his enemies did not. Rome's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness. Roman commanders believed discipline and numbers guaranteed victory. They expected their enemies to collapse under relentless pressure. Hannibal realized he could use that confidence against them. Every victory he had achieved came not through superior numbers, but through deception, patience, and perfect timing. By the summer of 216 BC, both armies moved toward the small town of Cannae in southeastern Italy. The location itself appeared insignificant, surrounded by open plains and farmland beside the Aufidus River. Yet beneath its quiet landscape lay one crucial advantage. The region stored enormous supplies of grain, food that both armies desperately needed. Whoever controlled Cannae would strengthen their campaign while weakening the enemy. The Roman Senate made a decision unlike anything in its history. Instead of sending a normal army, it assembled one of the largest military forces the Republic had ever fielded. Ancient sources claim nearly 80,000 infantry and around 6,000 cavalry marched toward Cannae. It was a breathtaking display of Roman confidence. Soldiers believed they were participating not merely in another battle, but in the final destruction of Hannibal's army. Across the battlefield, Hannibal looked upon the approaching Roman legions with calm determination. His own army was far smaller, numbering roughly 50,000 men. Many were battle-hardened veterans from Spain, Gaul, and North Africa. They had survived rivers, mountains, starvation, and countless battles. They trusted Hannibal completely because every impossible decision he had made had somehow led them to victory. As dawn approached on August 2, 216 BC, the hot summer wind swept across the dusty plains of Cannae. Thousands of shields reflected the rising sun. Horses stamped nervously across the dry earth. Trumpets echoed through the morning air while commanders issued final orders. On one side stood the greatest military power of the ancient world. On the other stood a smaller army led by a general whose genius would soon change warfare forever. Within a few hours, history itself would be rewritten, and the battlefield of Cannae would become one of the deadliest killing grounds the ancient world had ever witnessed. As the first rays of sunlight spread across the plains of Cannae, both armies stood motionless, separated by only a few hundred yards of open ground. The dry summer wind carried dust across the battlefield, while thousands of Roman shields shimmered beneath the blazing Italian sun. Nearly 80,000 Roman infantry waited in tightly packed formations, confident that sheer numbers would crush Hannibal once and for all. Across the field, Hannibal silently studied every movement of his enemy. Outnumbered and surrounded by veterans who knew the odds were against them, he showed no sign of fear. Instead, he smiled. The battlefield looked exactly as he had hoped. Unlike the Romans, Hannibal did not arrange his army in a traditional battle line. He placed his strongest African infantry on both flanks while positioning his less experienced Celtic and Iberian warriors in the center. Instead of forming a straight line, the center bulged forward in a gentle curve, almost inviting the Romans to attack. To the Roman commanders, it appeared to be a mistake. They believed Hannibal had exposed his weakest troops. In reality, it was the first move of one of history's greatest military traps. On the wings of his army stood Hannibal's greatest advantage, his cavalry. To the left, heavily armed Spanish and Gallic horsemen prepared for a brutal charge. On the right, swift Numidian cavalry waited patiently, famous for their unmatched speed and mobility. Hannibal knew the battle would not be won by infantry alone. Control of the battlefield would belong to whichever side controlled the cavalry. Moments later, the silence shattered. Roman trumpets echoed across the plain as thousands of soldiers surged forward. The earth trembled beneath the weight of marching legions. Roman commanders believed a single overwhelming assault would smash through Hannibal's center and end the war before sunset. Their massive formation advanced like an unstoppable wall of steel. The collision was deafening. Spears splintered, shields crashed together, and swords flashed beneath clouds of dust. Hannibal's center absorbed the impact exactly as planned. Step by step, the Celtic and Iberian warriors slowly retreated. To the Romans, it looked like victory. They pushed harder, believing the Carthaginian line was collapsing under pressure. But Hannibal's retreat was no accident. Every step backward drew the Roman army deeper into the battlefield. As thousands of legionaries pressed forward, their enormous formation became tighter and tighter. Soldiers in the rear continued pushing ahead, unaware that those at the front were rapidly losing room to fight. Soon many Romans could barely swing their swords. The very discipline that had made Rome powerful was beginning to trap its own army. Meanwhile, the battle on the flanks unfolded with terrifying speed. Hannibal's heavy cavalry launched a devastating charge against the Roman horsemen. The impact was overwhelming. Within minutes, the Roman cavalry began to break. Some fled the battlefield while others were cut down where they stood. Without wasting a single moment, Hannibal's horsemen turned away from the fleeing enemy and galloped behind the Roman infantry. On the opposite wing, the Numidian cavalry kept the remaining Roman horsemen occupied. Their constant attacks prevented any organized response, buying precious time for Hannibal's master plan to unfold. At the center, the curved Carthaginian line slowly transformed. What had begun as a bulging formation now bent inward. The Romans believed they were driving the enemy toward defeat. In reality, they had marched directly into the jaws of a trap. Then came the decisive moment. Hannibal gave the signal. The elite African infantry, who had remained untouched on both flanks, suddenly pivoted inward with perfect discipline. Armed with captured Roman equipment and trained to fight in close formation, they struck the exposed sides of the advancing legions. At the same time, Hannibal's victorious cavalry thundered back onto the battlefield and crashed into the Roman rear. Within moments, the Roman army found itself surrounded on every side. There was no escape. The world's most powerful army had become a prison of its own making. Panic spread through the packed Roman ranks. Officers shouted conflicting orders that disappeared beneath the screams of wounded soldiers and the clash of steel. Men at the front had no idea they were surrounded, while those at the rear desperately searched for a way out that no longer existed. Dust darkened the air until many soldiers could barely see beyond a few feet. Horses screamed as they crashed into fleeing infantry. Broken shields littered the ground. Everywhere, exhausted Romans fought not only the enemy but also the crushing weight of their own comrades. Hannibal watched from a nearby rise, calm and composed. Years of planning, months of marching, and countless victories had all led to this single moment. His masterpiece was complete. The double envelopment, surrounding an enemy from every direction, had never been executed on such a scale before. It was a tactic so brilliant that military commanders would study it for more than 2,000 years. But for the Roman soldiers trapped inside the circle, history no longer mattered. Their only concern was survival. The circle was now complete. On every side, Roman soldiers found themselves trapped by Hannibal's perfectly executed maneuver. There was no open ground to retreat toward, no cavalry left to protect them, and no commander capable of restoring order. The proud army that had marched into Cannae believing victory was certain had become a sea of terrified men fighting for every breath. Dust filled the air so thickly that many soldiers could barely recognize friend from foe. The sound of clashing steel, screaming horses, and desperate cries echoed across the battlefield as the Carthaginian trap slowly tightened. Unlike previous battles, this was no longer a contest between two armies. It had become a massacre. The Romans were packed so tightly together that many could not even lift their shields or swing their swords. Men in the rear unknowingly pushed forward, crushing their own comrades while giving Hannibal's veterans even less room to escape. One by one, entire Roman units disappeared beneath relentless attacks from every direction. The African infantry maintained perfect discipline, striking with precision before stepping back into formation. Meanwhile, Hannibal's cavalry continued riding behind the Roman lines, cutting down anyone who attempted to flee. Hour after hour, the killing continued beneath the blazing Italian sun. Ancient historians describe the battlefield as one of the bloodiest scenes the ancient world had ever witnessed. Thousands of Roman soldiers fell where they stood. Senators, military tribunes, experienced commanders, and ordinary citizens fought side by side, but rank no longer mattered. Inside Hannibal's deadly circle, everyone faced the same fate. Roman consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus, one of the Republic's highest-ranking leaders, was mortally wounded during the fighting. Refusing to abandon his soldiers, he remained on the battlefield until he was killed. His death symbolized the complete collapse of Roman command. The surviving consul, Gaius Terentius Varro, managed to escape with only a small group of cavalry, carrying the devastating news back to Rome. By the time the fighting finally ended, the scale of the disaster was almost unimaginable. Ancient sources claim that more than 50,000 Roman soldiers were killed in a single day, while thousands more were captured. Although modern historians debate the exact numbers, nearly all agree that Cannae remains one of the greatest military catastrophes in Roman history. Never before had so much of Rome's military strength been destroyed in just a few hours. For Hannibal, it was the greatest victory of his career. Against an army that outnumbered him significantly, he had achieved complete annihilation through strategy rather than brute force. His double-envelopment tactic became the gold standard of battlefield maneuver, and would later be studied by commanders such as Napoleon Bonaparte, Helmuth von Moltke, and even military planners during the Second World War. More than 2,000 years later, officers at military academies around the world still analyze Hannibal's masterpiece at Cannae. When news of the defeat reached Rome, panic swept through the city. Families gathered in silence, waiting for loved ones who would never return. The Senate feared that Hannibal would march directly toward the capital and end the Roman Republic forever. Citizens prepared for the worst. Gates were reinforced. New defensive positions were established. Every rumor increased the growing fear that Rome's final days had arrived. But something unexpected happened. Hannibal did not march on Rome. For centuries, historians have debated why. Some believe his exhausted army lacked the equipment needed to besiege a heavily fortified city. Others argue that his soldiers were too tired after the enormous battle. Some ancient writers even claim that one of Hannibal's own commanders famously said, "You know how to win a victory, Hannibal, but not how to use one." Whether that famous quote was actually spoken remains uncertain. What is certain is that Rome survived. Instead of surrendering, the Roman Republic responded with remarkable determination. Rather than negotiating peace, the Senate immediately began raising new armies. Older men, younger boys, and even slaves were recruited into military service. Rome refused to admit defeat. The Republic accepted unimaginable losses, but remained committed to continuing the war, no matter how long it took. Over the following years, Hannibal remained undefeated in many battles across Italy. Yet without enough reinforcements from Carthage and unable to force Rome into surrender, his strategic victories slowly lost their political impact. Eventually, Rome carried the war into North Africa, forcing Hannibal to return home. In 202 BC, at the Battle of Zama, he suffered the only major defeat of his military career against the Roman general Scipio Africanus, bringing the Second Punic War to an end. Although Hannibal lost the war, his reputation never faded. His brilliance at Cannae transformed military history forever. What made him extraordinary was not simply his courage but his ability to think differently from every commander of his time. While others relied on numbers, Hannibal relied on deception. While others sought direct confrontation, he manipulated his enemies into destroying themselves. His victories proved that intelligence could overcome overwhelming odds. Today, the quiet fields near modern-day Cannae reveal little of the horror that unfolded there more than 2,000 years ago. The blood has long disappeared, and the weapons have turned to dust. Yet the lessons of that battlefield remain alive. Every generation of military leaders returns to Hannibal's masterpiece, searching for the secrets behind one of history's most perfect victories. The Battle of Cannae was more than a clash between Rome and Carthage. It was a reminder that confidence without strategy can lead to disaster, and that sometimes the smallest army, guided by the greatest mind, can change the course of history forever. Narration ending. More than 2,000 years have passed since the Battle of Cannae, yet its lessons still shape military strategy across the world. Hannibal's victory remains one of history's greatest examples of tactical genius, a battle where intelligence defeated overwhelming power. If you enjoyed this journey into history, don't forget to subscribe to Chroniq History for more legendary battles, forgotten empires, and the untold stories that changed the world forever.